Hello and welcome to another edition of the CBB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, coming to you live at midnight Eastern. But I have a guest. Unusual for me to have guests at this hour. I'm usually a loner, but my good friend that I haven't talked to in a long time, Eric Razzle, the man, the always charismatic MLB card collector, knows his stuff on college sports, just does a little bit of everything. He was nice enough to put some clothes on and come on live and do the show with me, which we appreciate, man. How you doing? It's been a really long time since I feel like we've even talked. So,
Good.
We had a draft together today on the satellite radio thing, and I just, that made me fiend for some razzle time. So I'm glad you were able to come on with us.
Yeah, it's good to get a chance to jump on, and it's definitely been over a year since we've, I guess, done anything together, and we didn't really talk much during their dynasty season this year, but it's probably because my team wasn't all that great, so I wasn't as active as I should have been.
Yeah, for sure. I usually, when I come to you with trade offers, I know you got to chew on them for a couple of days. So I normally just buzz off and then check back with you after. But yeah, we're going to be doing the slate breakdown, NIT games, play-in games. They gave us a few more tonight for tomorrow on the DraftKings slate. That's what we're going to focus primarily on, which we have 7 games. They only gave us the 5 today, which maybe it wasn't so bad because I would have been all over Vanderbilt, who did come out on top, thankfully. But Scottie Pippen didn't look like he cared too much. And that was one of those things about the NIT games. You don't really know which teams are going to care. Like I thought for sure today, Xavier was going to not even have their full roster available because of the rumors on the message boards about Fremantle wanting to transfer, Scruggs, obviously not caring. And I thought for sure they'd be the team that didn't care, but they did knock off Cleveland State, even though our bet of the night was Cleveland State plus 12.5. So that came through. And then Texas A&M and Oklahoma, they both looked like they cared. So, just on the NIT games, I guess you never truly know. With the play-in games, we know in the 16 seeds, of course, are going to be trying hard. And then we just saw that Indiana-Wyoming game, which was a war as expected. So a little bit of, different type of narratives here, different care levels, and approaching a slate like this, we're going to have to really, go in depth and target certain games that we know these guys are going to play and they're actually going to care. At the end, we'll go ahead and talk about, a core. I usually like to give a 3-man core. It doesn't have to be necessarily a pay up mid-range in value. It can be 3 values. It can be, whatever you want to do, but we'll give that. I'll give a FanDuel core for the FanDuel players, usually talk a little bit about prize picks, and then we should have plenty of time to perhaps talk about brackets. These guys have heard me talk about my bracket stuff enough. So having you on here, Eric, we'll get your thoughts on maybe, some Final Four picks if you have them yet, and maybe a couple of key upsets, and just chop it up about basketball like we do.
That sounds great to me.
And if anybody is we have a couple people starting to trickle in here. If you're watching, if you have questions, comments, concerns, we interact with the chat as we go. I know it's a little bit late tonight, so we probably won't have a lot of interactions, but if you do, feel free to pop those questions in. If you're watching on demand, and pop those on the YouTube channel. I do check throughout the day and get those answered for you as well. So we will just go ahead and start and dive in here on the first game, which is the play-in game between the 16 seeds, Wright State Raiders versus Bryant. You see my name here. I put trying to be clever, putting the Peter Kiss from a rose here. Everybody's talking about him. Obviously, former Rutgers transfer as a role player there, now leading the NCAAs and scoring. A lot of people are excited about him. He's on multiple player to watch list, even though, he probably won't be around long if he does win this game. But I think this is the type of situation where a lot of people are going to want to play him. DraftKings did price him up at 8-9, so it's not as if we're getting a discount, but I think it's the type of player that we'll see get a pretty big ownership boost just because of the hype, the name, and obviously looking at his stats, they're going to see that he's a big-time producer. I do think that the Wright State guys are where I'm going to be looking. It will be pretty popular because looking at it, they did a good job pricing Bryant, but then you look at the Wright State guys and you see, Vasily at 7.3, pretty cheap. Trey Calvin at 4.9 is we're getting into egregious territory here. Maybe not to the level of David Jones 4.7, Terrell Brown 4.6, but fairly bad because we're looking at a guy here on a 7-game slate that's going to be super high owned, consistently putting up 30 plus DK points. one of their better scorers. Wright State doesn't have a very deep bench to speak of, so he's going to play the entire game. Vasily, if he doesn't foul, he's going to play 30 plus minutes if he can. He's got into some foul trouble at times. Tim Finke, who's well traveled, he's going to play the entire game. He's only priced at 5'2". Holden at 6'9". He's going to play the whole game. So really easy to judge here who's going to produce for the Raiders. And I think, stacking them up is going to be a pretty good idea. And then that's going to allow you to maybe go back and play Kiss. So other than, the obvious Peter Kiss and maybe a Wright State stack here, what are you doing with a game like this? And knowing that a lot of people might be scared of the NIT games because of the whole care factor. Do you think that, because you're a big leverage player, GPP guy, do you find yourself maybe not stacking a game like this, knowing everybody else will, or will you just fall in line?
Yes, my initial thought is like I might end up with 3 guys from this game in every lineup, and it's going to be popular, obviously, gigantic total, right? You're talking about Wright State being pretty centralized. Like Bryant is pretty centralized in all their happenings as well. Obviously Kiss in his scoring, but I actually like Charles Pride more at a lower ownership, I would assume, because he's not the name that Peter Kiss is. And I even like Elysius too, at 5,500 that I think people might skip over. And I think he's a piece to get into this game. He's not going to have another 8-block game like he did the last time out against Wagner, but just there's ways like to get different within this game that's going to be popular. I just find it really tough to want to fade a lot of this game because there's just going to be so many points scored.
Yeah, it's going to be definitely tough. If the prices were maybe a little bit less egregious on the Wright State guys, it might be easier. But yeah, you're right, and that's a good point. I get this question a lot in our Discord on FTN. People, oh, hey, I want to get leverage. I don't want to, what's the chances of this guy that's going to be 70% owned? Can I get away from him? And sometimes when I always say if it's a higher price guy, yes. If it's kind of a cheaper guy, like, we're going to see Calvin be pretty high owned. I don't think there's a lot of leverage with fading him because of the low price, but maybe with Kiss. And like you said, they have other options with like Charles Pride, who's been there forever, Elysius, even Elidia at times. At 8.2 for way cheaper, who has an opportunity to also put up 40 plus, or if the Wright State guys who probably don't have the personnel to really slow Peter Kiss, but say that he has a bad shooting night, maybe he gets fouls, he has 10 turnovers like Hunter Maldonado did tonight, something like that. Then you have a guy at lower ownership, same team, same kind of scenario, can score or put up points just as much. So I like that idea of perhaps playing Pride instead. I play a lot of single entry and cash games and stuff, but I still play kind of a little risque in those games. But I'm certainly with you in terms of we're going to have to play a lot of this game because the Calvin Price, Basile for sure. I like him, Finke, all those guys. I didn't say also throwing me off, man. I'm not used to having you. I'm just in awe right now. I'm so happy. I didn't say that Wright State -3.5, the total 155. So like you mentioned, a very high total. It's worth noting that Wright State has a 98 tempo ranking, Bryant 7th. So you're looking at 2 teams who are going to get out and run, and there's going to be a lot of possessions here. Moving on to the next game, one that I'm really excited about, Dayton versus Toledo. Toledo -1, a total sort of high, 144. Toledo 84th in tempo ranking per Ken Palm. Dayton 342. Dayton is unable, if they advance here, their first 2 games, even though they're the top seed, are on the road because of the fact that obviously the play-in games take place on their floor. So those are going to take precedence. So they do have to play on Toledo's court, although, I don't know the actual distance of those 2 schools, but they got to be pretty close, I think, being that they're in the, same vicinity. So I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal in terms of fans traveling. Dayton's fans are pretty aggressive and they travel well. They're always on Twitter. And I was really rooting for them this weekend to make the tournament, but obviously losing their star freshman guard, Malachi Smith, not the Chattanooga Malachi, but losing him to injury was kind of a death blow for them. So they weren't able to do enough. Obviously they had some really bad losses in the beginning of the season. They followed this up with good wins against Kansas, a couple others, and it just didn't really, it haunted them to have those like quad 3, quad 4 losses. So we will have to monitor here because this is a game that's going to have a lot of points as well. Malachi, if he can't go, I've been kind of tooting the horn of Kobe Bray. He's another youngster freshman on this team. He's looked really good as a secondary player behind Smith, Kamara, and Deron Holmes, and somebody that is kind of coming into his own, and they're trusting him more. You see 3 of his last 4 games, he's been over 25 minutes. He's kind of, starting to push his fantasy average up. Somebody that without Malachi would have to be forced into a lot more minutes. So I like what he offers in terms of, value 4.7. He does have a shot rate of over 23.6%, which is second on the team. So when he's on the floor, he has the green light, and he's their best 3-point shooter, making roughly 42 to 43% of his threes. So I'm looking there. Also going to be looking at guys like Tamani Kamara, Deron Holmes. This is an excellent slate for MME stuff. I feel very good about this. There's a lot of the teams. It's going to be a much higher scoring slate tonight or tomorrow than it was tonight. But I like all of these options here between Kamara at 7K, Deron Holmes at 7.1, who has really, I every time Deron Holmes is around, I talk about Dayton. It's I had the chance to draft him. It was between him and FTN Reed. Agonized on that decision for 3 hours even, and still got it wrong, unfortunately. And the guy behind me took him, which I knew would happen. And then, of course, FTN Reed had a rough season. Deron Holmes is a star. I ended up trading FTN Reed anyways, so it didn't matter. But Deron Holmes is a guy that I really like, and I will always think of that time I could have drafted him when I see him. So the Dayton's a really young team. Toledo has veteran guys on them, so there's going to be I think probably a fair amount of people that picked Toledo to win this game, but Dayton's just a really good team even without Malachi. There's also some value here with RJ Blakeney at 3.9, Kobe Elvis, the DePaul transfer at 4.6. So you do have some cheapies that you can potentially use here. On the Toledo side, obviously, they've been on the slate a bunch of times, so everybody should know Ryan Rollins at this point. They priced him to 8.7. I'm glad he's not like 6.5 or 5.7 or something silly like that. There was a time on the slate before where he was like 6.5 the first time against Marshall, and that was a ridiculous price. So it's absolutely a decision. If Malachi were to play, I think I would like him less just because of his steal rate, and I think they would be able to bother Rollins to a degree. And then, J2 Shimate at 7.6, that feels a little high for him as well. I think I'd rather go with the Dayton side. And then you have some secondary options like Ray J. Dennis, Raheem Moss, and Milner, but they're all priced up as well. So we see a team with Toledo that is very condensed. We're on that harp about condensed statistics and usage and all that. So it feels like we know where it's going to come from Toledo on Toledo's team, but there's really just not very good prices aside from maybe Raheem Moss where I can see fitting him in comfortably. So what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Rollins fan, but I don't think I can pay $8,700 for him. I think I might end up with Moss or Dennis in a fair amount of lineups. But I don't know if I'm going to go much with Dayton. I'll probably have Holmes a couple shares, but I can't really use Smith if he returns just because I don't know how I can completely trust him at his price. So, there will be points scored in this game, but I just have a feeling I might skip it. I guess it really depends on how into the first game I get with a majority of my lineups. Just because you do have to spend up for the guys in this game. Initial thought is I would definitely rather spend up on a handful of guys in that first game. So I don't know. I mean, Holmes is always somebody that I am afraid of being underweight on when they are on the slate just because of his block shots, and rebounding, and all that. I mean, he could easily drop a 45 tomorrow, and I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, he and Toledo is a team with all their guards and wings that like to drive, that get a fair amount of shots blocked. So we saw today with Bryson Gresham, who was kind of a sneakier play. He had had a block party in that first game. So predicting blocks and steals is something that a lot of people always say you can't do, but when you pick these matchups and you're looking for some edge somewhere or maybe a sneakier option, that's somewhere I like to look. So, it's going to depend on the rest of the value that we find. And there's going to be some tough decisions because this slate has a lot of really good options, but there are several underpriced players that are going to make it to where we probably don't need to pay the, almost $9K for Rollins in our main lineups, at least.
Right.
Next game on the slate is Mississippi State versus Virginia. We have the Cavs minus 2.5. Their total is 124. Their tempo ranking is 357. They actually aren't last in the country anymore. And then Mississippi State 263. And I do remember when we did do shows together, it tended to be when Virginia was on the slate, and it was during the times where, it was years ago where everybody was in this mindset where Virginia's on the slate. We got to fade them. They're slow. Their defense is good. Can't target against them, can't target for them. But you would always find a way to, pull somebody out that would make value. And then the rest of the industry kind of caught up and thought, well, yeah, they play these games all the time, like Razzle said, and we can get some value out of here. And I've really been using Reese Beekman a lot lately, and he's been my guy. But you take it away, man. Virginia and Razzle, it feels like a connection that we have here. So tell us what you like.
It's, a lot of people initially were, so afraid of the pack line defense, right? Where in theory, like, you shouldn't be able to, have big guys get anything, the way that they cloud everything up. But,
yeah,
part of it is how slow they are, right? Like, we generally like big guys in slower games. They're given more time to work and, generally some more missed shots because when teams want to play so slow, it's generally because they don't have the offensive firepower to keep up, the shooting ability. So, but also, now, like, Shedrick's a strong defender, but, he's not overly strong, right? So, like, we can attack him with the big guys. So that's going to put me on Tolu Smith. He's been up and down this year, but he's coming off of a strong stretch, where he went, 38 plus in 3 out of 5 games. So he's always shown some ability, and now, he's playing 30 plus minutes again. So I wish I could go to Garrison Brooks, but he just does not look like the North Carolina version of Garrison Brooks from, I guess now it's 2.5 years ago, but it's just not the same guy that I remember. But overall, I don't really love this game. I think Beekman is a solid GPP option. He has some safety to him too, right? Like, I think I started my notes for tomorrow, and he's shot 4 for 17 over the last 2 games, but he's still averaging 28 DK points, despite shooting terribly. So I think he does have a strong enough floor to be usable. But obviously the game's just not attractive overall.
Yeah. And he's kind of become the lone Virginia guy that you can really trust. He went through a lull in midseason where you kind of had to back off. Like, he started non-con really well. And then he kind of was like dropping 15, 13, all these scores. So it kind of faded away from him. And then the price dropped down to like the low 6s. And then we were able to kind of bounce back and use him in the last few games. Yeah, he's been putting up some pretty big numbers without having to score. And those type of guys with those safe floors definitely, make you comfortable, because they're, especially lately, there's been some really, chalkier busts, or we saw it with kind of Race Thompson today. Didn't perform for us, or Quentin Jackson, and getting these guys who are safer, or they get at least 4x at a higher rate is really important. And sometimes it's worth, in this day and age of CBB DFS with all the landmines, overpaying sometimes for that safety, because 7-1 is a little bit high than I'd want to pay for him. But I think against Mississippi State, he could definitely perform. They're a team that they've got some guys who ball handling wise don't really value the basketball quite as much. We'll see Molinar, turn it over. Shaquille Moore does it a lot. They've been using our guy, Anderson Garcia, who I love. I'm always talking about him. He's been, kind of turning it over a little bit. So this is a team that will give up a high number of turnovers, and a lot of them are from steals. And that's kind of Beekman's thing. He blocks shots and gets rebounds, but he's the guy that can rack up 3 to 5 steals in the blink of an eye. So I love him for not even safety, but maybe even with some GPP upside here. Everybody else on the Virginia team is kind of tough for me to kind of get behind. I do see they've given, somebody in the chat said this as well, they gave Jaden Gardner some guard eligibility there. I don't know why that happens, but sometimes it's they've been making Armando Bacot and others guards when they're clearly not. So right. I guess at 6'8", he's okay and interesting, and you got that guard forward eligibility for him. And then, on Mississippi State side, Garrison Brooks, he came over and Jeffries too, man. Like Brooks has at least been adequate, but Jeffries, what was it, 2 years ago in Memphis, in his second year, he was the preseason, AAC player of the year. And that didn't work out, and he got chased off here. And yeah, he doesn't look like the same player at all. And it was the point where he lost his starting job to Anderson Garcia, who's been fantastic. I know he looked pretty bad against the Vols last time out, but who doesn't at this point? And this is a spot against Virginia where I think, he's kind of interesting for GBPs at that 5-7 mark, but maybe still a little too priced out. But I think he's going to be a big time star next year. So I really like him. Moving on to the next one, Towson versus Wake Forest. Tough break for Wake Forest not getting into the tournament. I didn't think they would. -8, 149.5 over under. Towson very slow, 317 tempo rating. Wake Forest 41st. At this point, you guys should be very familiar with Wake Forest. Obviously, the things revolve around, Alondes Williams, ACC Player of the Year, which I don't think it's the first time ever that the ACC Player of the Year didn't make the tournament, but I think it's the first time in a very long time. I remember hearing that stat the other day. Jake LaRavia, that Forbes he hit the home run, many home runs on the transfer market with Alondes Williams. LaRavia, he's getting a lot of production out of Kadeem C, Dallas Walton as role players. Isaiah Mucius and David Williamson, who were holdovers from before, they're producing. So they have a very nice team. I think that I don't really prefer to pay 9-6 for Alondes here, even though I think, even in a slower pace game and an opponent that should probably be a little overmatched, he has the opportunity to, flirt with a triple double, but I think that he'll more so be probably on the other side, meaning the lower side of 35, 34 instead of closer to 40. I could be wrong about that, but I don't particularly want to pay 9-6 to find that out when we have some really solid options in that 7K range. And as we get closer to Iona, we have some guys in the 5K range that, I just want to load up as many of these mid-range guys as possible. So I'm probably not getting to Alondes or Jake this time. If I'm using a Wake Forest guy, I am looking heavily, and me from years, Russell, when I get a guy, I usually will play the hell out of him or talk about him a lot. My guy for Wake Forest happens to be Damari Monsanto, who did come over with Forbes from ETSU and is getting opportunity now. He's just a dead-eye shooter. He doesn't play, but, 18 to sometimes 20 minutes. He's only 4K. When he's on the floor, he has the absolute green light to take any shot he wants. There was a game a while back, I believe it might have been against Louisville, where he got a start, and a lot of, I guess, from the Discord were on him. He had a really slow start, and everybody was, oh, great play. And then the second half, he got hot, and he just couldn't miss. And it was like, yes, this was against Clemson. Okay. He hit 4 of his 11 triples. It's like, this is what this guy can do. He is a high volume shooter. He can score the basketball. He's not going to give a lot of secondary stats very often. You'll see his rates, 2.2% steal rate, but his rebounding rate is, right around just 23%. Assist rate's non-existent, but he does have a 25.4% shot rate, usage rate about 21%. And like I said, he's shooting 41% from long range. That number was higher earlier in the season, but now that he's playing more and taking more shots, it's gone down a bit. But 2 of his last 4, he's been over 20 minutes. That's really all I'm looking for from him, at this 4K rate. And if we think that, they pile drive Towson a little bit, even though, Ken Palm and these other sites don't think they will, he may end up finding himself into a few more minutes. So I definitely like Monsanto as my value option here. On the Towson side, it's a little tougher. Wake's defense has been pretty solid. You've got a few guys here on their team that are definitely solid, but they're priced, accordingly. Cam Holden, who has a 25.3% usage rate, Nick Timberlake, 23.7, Terry Nolan, a 24% shot rate, Charles Thompson, who's been really one of their best scorers lately. These guys are all priced up. Thompson, 6'8", Timberlake, 6'9", Holden, 7'9", Gibson, 6K, Nolan, maybe the most playable at that 5'6" price point. But his minutes out of that group may be the least appealing, just because sometimes they don't bring him up the bench very fast, or he'll come off as a 6th man and then he won't close games. So with that in mind, the prices for Towson probably have me off. But are you finding any sneakier options here, or is it kind of just one of those games where you might be looking elsewhere?
For the most part, looking elsewhere. I do have some interest in Thompson. If he's healthy and back, like you saw that dip in dealing with an injury, and now he jumped up to 28 minutes last time out. So if there's a chance he gets back, in the 32 to 35 minute range, he obviously has upside for 6,800. I mean, he just went for 55 DK points. Obviously, against James Madison's a little different than Wake Forest, but he does have that upside. So, he's going to be, I guess unowned really. Wake Forest wise, I just don't think I can pay up for the two guys. So I'm kind of in my head trying to flip between who I think ends up with more run between Dallas Walton and Kadeem C. With Towson being, a smaller team, I could see C, getting a few more minutes with his double upside, kind of like how you're on Monsanto. I'm on the Kadeem C train. I have been for a couple months now. He's just been a high point per minute guy, coming off the bench energy wise. So at 4,200, I like him quite a bit. But I don't know that we necessarily need him, based on some of the value options that are out there.
Yeah, and that's a good call out because when he is on the floor, he's grabbing a high amount of rebounds. His offensive rebounding rate over 8%, 18.6% defensive rebounding rate. And you'll see he's got games of, in 20 minutes, 6 rebounds, 15 minutes, 8 rebounds, in 21 minutes, 7. So yeah, if he gets anywhere north of 18-ish minutes here, that's definitely a good call because he is playing very well. Somebody 2 years ago at Ole Miss that we thought had a chance, and then he kind of had a down year last year. And yeah, another guy that's kind of found himself here at Wake Forest. Something to be said about Steve Forbes' ability to coach guys. Next game, Nichols versus SMU. It's another team with SMU that had a chance, and then they kind of played their way out and didn't do enough to make the tournament. But here they are in the NIT, and I think this is a team that we haven't really been talking about as much, but this is a team that I think will show up. I saw some talk about, Kendrick Davis won't care. I think that he has too much pride, the Weathers brothers as well, to not play their best in this spot. They are favored by 15.5 on DK. The total's over 153 points, so there's a lot of points expected here. Nichols plays at a pretty high tempo. They're 51st in that regard. SMU 114th. I have a pretty strong take about the SMU side, but let's start with you. What do you like in here?
This is one of those spots that I kind of alluded to today on, I guess, the Sirius XM. Seeing some guys that put up some really strong numbers in a weaker conference. So I'm kind of torn because there's a few guys on Nichols that have some massive ceilings, right? But yeah, they're not playing anybody like SMU. The one thing that stood out to me with Ty Gordon is he went into Purdue and put up 42 DK points. Obviously, Purdue's defense isn't the greatest, but that's still a hostile environment to go into, against a big-time team. He put up 33 at Wisconsin. So he's just somebody that I think is worth paying up for GPP wise that I think most people are just going to skip over. And then one guy, I'm trying to figure out why Latrell Jones is priced at 4,800. Just based off of, usage wise, he's taken 37 shots over the last 2, 64 shots over the last 5 games, averaging 7 rebounds a game. He's just somebody that I'm probably going to end up using, even though obviously I don't really want to use many guys against SMU at this point. But then on the other side, I don't know that I want to spend up on SMU either, even though it's a higher paced game, right? I'd probably taken Michael Weathers over Marcus, just because he's shown kind of 5X ability more often over the last few weeks. Kendrick Davis obviously always has massive upside, but outside of the brothers and then Davis and I guess Emmanuel with his newfound rebounding ability recently, I just don't like their prices, so I'm gonna probably end up looking elsewhere, and obviously it could come back to hurt me. But
yeah, and this is another one that really pushes that MME. This is a multi-lineup slate because, in one lineup, you probably aren't going to be paying up for these SMU guys because there are so many valuable options in these other games. But with the high total, there may be a semi blowout here, but these guys are still going to play their normal minutes. The SMU bench is just kind of okay. I don't want to be caught without any exposure if they're putting up 100 spot on Nichols or something like that, which maybe that's saying a little bit too much, but I definitely feel like they're going to approach 90. Kendrick Davis price, it's actually pretty decent from where it usually is at 8.4, but I would more than likely be looking at a guy like Marcus Weathers, who, as you mentioned, is really contributing Michael Weathers, who's contributing in a lot more categories. Consistently, he's got that high steal rate, high block rate, where Marcus, has got the high rebounding rate. He can block shots a little bit too, but we're just seeing Michael flirting with a triple double more often than not. So I do really like him for GBP. But I think, and this is a guy that I draft, speaking of Dynasty, I drafted originally like a couple years ago in Dynasty, and he was, a pretty big scrub last year. So it's really painful to see him do this now, but it's a little too late. But the 6-1 price should keep people off. But I think he's kind of that guy that struggles against the upper tier competition. But when he gets a softer opponent, he has no issue slamming them around. And you'll see, games like against Tulane, he had 18-4-3. A Cincinnati team that, has kind of been a punching bag at times. He had 10 points, 10 rebounds, 2 assists, a couple steals, 33-33. Against Tulsa, who's been kind of meh, he had 16, 6, and 4. So I do feel like, and you can even look back and see, games again against Tulsa, he had 28 fantasy points. ECU, he had 30. And a lot of these are recently. Tulane, again, over 30. So I think that we could see him have one of those like 15, 6, 3, couple steals type games and really just kind of obliterate that 6-1 price point. So I do feel like he's a pretty strong option, and you'll see in his logs there, he's taking, 10 plus shots, a lot of those being from the 3-point line. This will be a nice pace boost. I think that SMU will have no problem kind of, running with them. The Nichols defense is pretty bad overall. They've been giving up a lot of points, all season. Obviously their conference is a little weaker, so they can get away with it. But against a team like SMU, I think they're really going to find themselves in trouble. And they haven't been a very good, 3-point defender either. So I could see Bandumo just having a really big game. I have that feeling about him. And, he's like, maybe kind of that Gresham play for today where he'll be a 5% owned and possibly putting up, a 30 plus number. But with this slate probably being so high scoring, there might be, 5 other guys in his range that put up 40. So maybe he isn't, the best play in the world, but I think he does represent more of one of those safer options that isn't likely to bust here against a soft opponent. And then, Nichols, the pricing on them is really, it's going to force us into playing some of these guys. I mean, 4.8 for Latrell Jones, 4.5 for Pierce Spencer. He's viable there. Manny Little's at 5.4 is interesting because he's going to play a lot. Ty Gordon's the only one that they actually priced up, and he would have been really interesting if his price was in that 4K range. So they did a good job on Gordon, but everybody else is pretty low. I think it'd even make a case for some GPP shares of Devontae Carter because he has got that 40 fantasy point upside. But between Spencer, Lyons, and Jones, I think you probably want to play one of those guys. And I think Latrell Jones is a good option. He's a guy we saw at Portland last year, put up some really solid numbers. If you look at the rates here, Jones has a pretty high rate in terms of shot rates, 23.4%. Steal rate is almost 2.5%. He's not a huge rebounder, but he does enough. But he gets a lot of really solid looks. His true shooting percentage and effective field goal are really high. And he gets a lot of, if you look back and watch any of these, I've happened to see 2 of the Nichols games. I don't know how, but I did. And he gets a lot of high percentage looks. He's getting a lot of drives, a lot of bunny type shots, and he's doing his damage there more often than not. So I definitely feel like he is the one you want to be using. But I also kind of like the Rye Lions play at a sub 5K, 6'11" kid. Pretty high offensive rebounding rate, somebody who we have to worry about with fouls. So you probably aren't going to be able to use him in your cash games. He has a 6 fouls per 40 rate, but he can step out. He can hit threes. He's shooting about 38% from long range, and another guy that capable of putting, getting a lot of bunnies, putbacks, things of that nature. So I think we're going to be pigeonholed into probably using somebody from Nichols here. And I think the chalk option will be Jones, but there's definitely some other appealing options here for your GPPs. All right, moving on to the next game, we have Rick Pitino's Iona Gales. Tough loss in the conference tournament for them. A lot of us thought they'd be tourney bound, playing Florida Gators team, who your favorite coach, I say this facetiously, Mike White, is off to Georgia. At Florida -6.5. Although I would be betting, me personally, I'll be all over the other side with Iona. Total 144.5. Florida just about 294, 300 in tempo ranking. Iona 75th. And I said, as we got into the later slates with Iona, there were some guys who are priced really just too cheap. And Nelly Junior Joseph is a guy that FTN subs are familiar with, because on Prize Picks, we're always talking about Prize Pick stuff. He's one that we've been, hitting quite a bit, whether that's his rebounding or his combo points, fantasy points. He's a really solid option. And at 5.8K, even going up against the Gators, who have Colin Castleton, but, they've got those injuries in the front court. Bigs against them hasn't been something that we have to stray away from. So I think at 5.8, he's a play that's going to be pretty chalky, and it's one that I'm definitely going to be all over. I don't want to get cute here and try to fade him, because they definitely biffed his price. Looking at it, he has a 24% usage rate, a offensive rebounding rate of 12.7%. His defensive rebounding rate's almost 20%. Block rate is about 7.5%. He's drawing 5.5 fouls per 40, and he's a little undersized for a 5, but he is one that doesn't foul a lot. He's got a 3.3 fouls per 40, so we can trust him to usually be on the court. Really tough loss against Ryder. That was a game that I was surprised about, but I think that Iona will come into this ready to play and look a lot better. Joseph in that game had 11, 6, 5 blocks. I think that they're going to come out, ready to prove a point and smack Florida here. I think they'll win. Other familiar names, Iona hasn't really been on DFS sites necessarily, but Tyson Jolly, SMU transfer, he's there. Elijah Joyner is there as well, a former Tulsa player. So they have some really nice pieces here. Quinn Zielinski, Dylan Van Eyck, guys that you can definitely look at. Jolly and Joyner are probably priced appropriately, but Dylan Van Eyck at 5K is somewhat interesting. Maybe Zielinski has a value, dart there if he gets the minutes at 4-5. But yeah, I think Junior Joseph at 5.8 is just kind of for me, a no-brainer play. And then on the side of Florida, looking at it, the lineup that Iona runs primarily, they don't have anyone above 6'9", 6'10" with Joseph. They do have a 7-footer in Osborne Shama, who plays 5 minutes a game. So the size of Iona isn't there. And even with the Gators kind of, being low at the front court because of injuries, they still have Colin Castleton, who could potentially just absolutely eat against this undersized front court at 6'11". So you have to definitely like him. The thing here is he's 9K. Can you find that price point and feel good about it? You definitely can. But that mid-range to me is just, I did that tonight. I know there was value that got there tonight, but the value is just, it's at this point of the season, it's getting a little spotty. And even with the Nichols guys who look very underpriced, I could easily see that, Jones put up like a 2x number there and be like, oh, damn, what happened? So I am a little leery about going up and paying that price for Castleton at 9K, but he should, if he cares, have a really big game here. And then you've got, your normal cast of characters with Flanders, Fleming, Tyree Appleby. Fleming at 6'9" is a tough ask for me. I could see him in this game, though, racking up a bunch of, secondary stats like the steals, blocks, rebounds that he's pretty good at. This Iona team, they didn't take care of the ball as much as Pitino teams usually do. They do get a lot stolen from them. So I could see Fleming, have one of those games where maybe he only scores 10 real points, but he's got 4 steals, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, something like that, and racks it up. But you are paying a pretty steep price at almost 7K. And then at this point, on the other side, for Florida, if we think that, Castleton isn't going to play that much, or this is an opportunity for Florida to see what they have in some of their younger guys and play Niels Lane more, who has looked good when he's on the floor, or Kwesi Reeves, who actually looked phenomenal last time out. Reeves has been one that has a high pedigree from high school. Got a chance to start, didn't do a lot with those minutes, but against Texas A&M in 28 minutes, he had 21 and 6. So it was nice to see him maybe figure things out. So I'm kind of intrigued by him as a possible GPP play. If he were to, burst back into the starting lineup, I think I would be very, very high on him. It is one of the last games on the slate, though, and if you wait and miss on the value beforehand that we know we have, that could be a really bad spot for you. So I don't want to prioritize them, but I do think Lane or Reeves could be pretty tasty if they start. So what do you think happens here? Who do you like? What are you doing?
I mean, yeah, I'm with you in the where you're going Iona wise. Now, Junior Joseph has been somebody I've been big fan of for a bit now. But and Van Eyck, I like his price point. I think either Van Eyck or Slazinski at that 4 spot ends up with a really solid matchup. With the injuries and everything with Florida, like they go a little more undersized. They just might have an advantage in that spot. But at Florida, I just don't know what to do. Is it a slap in the face to the players that your coach just left to go to Georgia? I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's obviously the chance that White was going to be fired anyways, right? Like they're pretty underachieving. First look, Castleton is in what should be a great spot, but I just don't know that I can pay $9K for him when, there's twice this year he's gone for 44 plus, which is, 5X plus that you're going to need on these slates, right? Like, I just don't know that he's worth it from that standpoint. He's going to have a massive floor, right? Like, unless for whatever reason he were to sit out or they decide they're going to split minutes amongst, a bunch of the younger guys, which obviously I guess could happen in this spot. But, yeah, I mean, it's probably guessing between Lane or Reeves as a value option, and just playing them. I like Fleming. Obviously, I had him in Dynasty along with McKissick as well. But Fleming stepped up the last few games, so going 32 plus in 3 out of his last 4. Taking plenty of shots as well, so he can probably get there. But Appleby, Jones, not really interested in. DeRougy, I don't really know what to do with that guy. He shows strong flashes and thought it was going to be just a big year for him, and at this point he's just kind of out there doing nothing. So really it ends up feeling like a spot where I might just avoid it because I don't know what Florida is going to do. Yeah. The upper classes, seniors could just be, hang it up, just be fed up with everything and, just coast or whatever. You don't really know what's going on in the locker room. But, if it was me, I'd go out there with a little more fire under my ass because my coach just left for Georgia of all places. So, I'd kind of take that personally, and I might use that to try to make a run, I guess, but not everybody thinks the same way, so I don't really know.
Yeah, especially, nowadays you'll see that with, people kind of sitting out sometimes, or you get to this point and yeah, they might just be done. And maybe, if I don't know Castleton's plan, but, he may not want to risk injury, kind of like what you see in Pro Bowl games, but, or bowl games, I mean, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, they definitely should show out or try their best, as a way to say, hey, as an FU to White on his way out. But clearly just he just did some bad things to that team. Because, yeah, DeRougy, like you said, showed flashes. He was really good at La Tech. And Myron Jones was really good at his previous stop in PSU. And then he comes here and he just forgets how to play basketball. And it's clearly just on the coaching staff. So, yeah, like I said, I would love to be able to use a guy like Reeves here if he's going to get a bunch of minutes and starts. But I don't think I'll have the luxury to wait to find out because all that other value is going earlier in the day. And I just don't want to be caught, missing out on a Jones, 30 fantasy point game at 50% ownership and waiting for Reeves and then find out he doesn't even start, or they play like Xavier did today where they didn't rest anyone like I thought. So
right.
Definitely tough. And then the last game on the slate, Notre Dame versus Rutgers, one I'm looking forward to, and I know Mike is as well. I saw him in the chat there. He's a Rutgers guy. But Notre Dame -1.5, total 131.5 is what I had the latest as. Notre Dame 250 in tempo ranking, Rutgers in 290th. You start us off here. What do you like?
I think I prefer the Rutgers side.
Definitely.
I've been using Geo Baker quite a bit. I think he's still a little too cheap, but I mean, I guess his floor is a little questionable at 6,300. But upside, the way that he kind of got hot, against Iowa, the way he got hot in the second half against Wisconsin. He's somebody that I like to see take over at times. Big Cliff is, I mean, I love watching him play. It's an interesting matchup on the interior. Atkinson's extremely smart. So that'll be a battle back and forth. I don't think I can go with Harper at 7,500. I think he's a perfectly fine play. I just don't know that he goes for, 37 and a half or more. Because a lot of times I'm looking for guys that can go 5x plus. That's really the baseline now because the GPPs have been so high scoring for much of the season. So, I need to have some upside to 275 in my DraftKings lineups, or more at times. But I like Wesley, but my guess is he ends up seeing a decent amount of McConnell. He's Notre Dame's most dangerous ball handler, right? The way that he can get to the rim. So stick the best defender on him, take him out of the game, and make Prentice Hub remember how to shoot, and kind of that route. But I don't know. I'm going to enjoy watching this game. I just don't know that I'm going to use many pieces of it.
Yeah. And when when the brackets were announced on Sunday and Mike and I did a show, we were talking, and that was my Cormac from the dead recently. And Hub's had some decent games, but yeah, he's kind of, the last 2 years we've wondered what happened to him. And they've got, an adequate big in Paul Atkinson, who did really well for us against Syracuse and then turn around and burn us at the end of the season. And then Leshevsky's back, kind of healthy. So they have a fine team, a decent team, but ultimately I think Rutgers is going to beat them. And I agree with you. Geo Baker at 6'3" is a very viable option. Perfect iteration of what you need in March, a scoring guard who is a veteran and won't fold under pressure. It's not like Rutgers made any deep runs, but he's played in a lot of games and he will be able to make shots when they need them. So I definitely like him at 6'3". I actually find myself, though, looking more towards Clifford Omarui at 6'4". I think he is far too tough for the Notre Dame front court to handle. Definitely, over Nate Leshevsky, who's kind of more finesse than power at times. He likes to shoot threes. We've seen Atkinson have some really good rebounding games, and then we've seen him kind of play a little bit laissez-faire, get pushed around. So Omarui is really starting to come into his own. He's starting to look like his older brother now. He's just very tough. Under the basket, very good rebounder, combined rate over 30%. He's blocking a ton of shots, over 5.5% block rate. He's just really solid, and I like him. And I think it matches up well for him to have a big game. And I think the next game awaiting, the winner gets Bama and Biggs. I'm sure you've been doing it too, Eric, all season, but Biggs against Bama has been such a primary DVP spot that continues to pay off. He has another juicy matchup there. So we could be talking about Omarui for the next two games possibly, or I am. And I really like him at that 6'4" price. And with, Nelly Jr. Joseph under him being more highly owned and some 7K options who are just, have all the upside in the world being higher owned, Cliff's going to be in that weird range that people are just going to overlook him. And I think it's a bit of a mistake. And while he won't probably hit like a 40 number, like you mentioned, that you may need to win those GBPs, he's very, very likely to hit something between 27 and 32, which puts him over 4X. You're generally going to be happy with that if you are in, these high dollar single entry or cash games, maybe not so much a large field tournament play, but a very strong, single entry type play or 3 max where he doesn't feel like a play that's going to detonate your lineup too often. We know he can get into some foul trouble. He had a couple games ago, he picked up 2 fouls in like a minute and a half, which was very upsetting. And it was a really good spot for him. In the second half, he ended up putting up like 19 and 18 minutes. So we know he's playing well. He's very confident. So that is my primary play from Rutgers. But I think, Baker at 6'3", McKay at 6'5", even maybe a little McConnell at 5'9". Like these are all nice prices. The only one I probably wouldn't be looking at would be Ron Harper at 7'5", and I still think he's fine if you're running, a GPP exposure to him. We know the Rutgers starting 5 is going to play a lot of minutes. We have seen Dean Reiber play pretty well off the bench when they need him, Hyatt to a degree, but for the main part of the game, if there's no foul trouble, their starters are going to be, running into the ground. So as far as cores, we will pull up some things here, give you a chance to think of maybe like a 3-man core that you're really feeling. And we'll kind of dig into that, and then we'll talk prize picks, and then, like I said, get into some bracket talk here. Let me get my cord here. I do want to also bring up FanDuel, but as far as cores go, so I'll start with FanDuel first, just to get that out of the way. I don't want to neglect my FanDuel folks. That game, there's also or on that slate, they have St. Louis on that slate, but Peter Kiss on FanDuel, because FanDuel is still kind of like, you want that high price guy for your lineup. So I think you probably go ahead and play him on FanDuel. Tim Finke is there at 4.9 on the Wright State side, kind of going with that Wright State cheapie price tag. And then I also like Caleb McConnell at only 4.8 on FanDuel there. Guy who's going to rack up some steals, get some rebounds, some assists. He'll score a little bit as well. So that would be what I'm looking at FanDuel. But DraftKings core is what I will ask you, Eric. Do you have one together yet, or do you need a minute?
Just give me like 30 seconds here.
Yeah. So for me, I don't want to be too obvious, but Trey Calvin is that's the chalky value piece, right? Everybody's going to have him. So I don't necessarily want to say that, but just know that I'm going to give a different 3, but I want everyone watching to know that obviously you're probably playing Trey Calvin, or you need to be strongly considering it. As far as the other core, I always have like a posh play, which is a lower own for me. It's so tough because the slate has so many damn good options and so many plays that I really want to use. It's really difficult for me to get there and play just one. But Nelly Jr. Joseph, I think, is one that I'm going to be very highly exposed to. I don't see any way I can possibly get away from him. I also am going to have a lot of Clifford Omarui. That's one that's going to be pretty cheap or pretty low owned. So I'll say Nelly Jr. Joseph, Clifford Omarui, and then as my third core piece, staying with Wright State, but going with maybe one that's not going to be as highly owned, I will say Grant Basile at 7.3. What do you got?
I was probably going to end up on Grant Basile as well. Obviously the Trey Calvin, but kind of in the Bryant side, I'm leaning right now to making Charles Pride a core play for me. Especially on DK, I saw on FanDuel, he and Kiss are almost identical in price points. So obviously I would probably choose Kiss in that scenario, but definitely thinking Pride. It's going to be one of the guys from Wright State as well. Maybe 2 of them, the way that I feel about this slate. And then I guess right now it would be Latrell Jones, but if we expect him to be pretty popular, I might move up to Manny Littles, on that team as well. I like his price point, near 35% rebounding rate. We didn't really talk about him much, but he's somebody that I could see myself going pretty overweight on.
Yeah, I like that call. Definitely knowing that, what the ownership might be. And I see on Twitter, you mentioned that you don't, because you have your value play that you like to pop in, and you say you struggle with ownership at times, but you don't give yourself more credit, because I'm sure where ownership will be for the most part. Every once in a while, it'll be kind of, why is this guy so highly owned? But for the most part, you can kind of tell where most people are going. So yeah, going with a play like Littles there could be pretty interesting. All right, so going over to prize picks, I don't expect, if you didn't look at that, no problem. I'll just give my prize picks, and we'll move on. Geo Baker over 12.5 real points. I like him to score 15 plus. He's going to have to. It's tournament time. They're going to really rely on him. Sticking with the Rutgers guys, I like Clifford Omarui over 24.1 fantasy points as well. I'm really tooting my guy there. Tamani Kamara 23.8 fantasy points. I like his over. Especially if Malachi's out, there's going to be a lot of Holmes and Kamara usage. Realize Malachi's a guard, but they're going to be feeding those guys or featuring them more instead of having to rely on Malachi as much. It might hurt them more not having that table setter, but I could see Kamara putting up 30 against this Toledo front court that defensively has given up a lot of fantasy points pretty much all season long to opposing bigs. And then there was one more that I lost it now, but let me see. There was one more I wanted to mention that I really liked. It's Colin Slater, over 23.9 for Long Beach. They're facing BYU. I know BYU's defense can be tough at times, but Slater is a stud for them. So 23.9 fantasy points is pretty low for him. All right, so that is the slate, prize picks, cores, and everything. I wanted to kind of get in with you, Eric, if you had time beforehand, just to talk a little bit about brackets, for 10, 15 minutes, whatever, and kind of get your feeling on where you like certain plays. So I guess we'll start basic and ask, what upsets might you be, looking at here? I know there's the obvious one that everyone's talking about, South Dakota State over Providence, but is there any others that you feel pretty passionately about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that one. I actually have South Dakota State winning 2 games as well. So I'm going out on a limb, and obviously having them upset Iowa, which is probably a pretty hot take with how strong Iowa closed out the season. But I got to stay on brand, I guess. Vermont over Arkansas.
Yep.
I'm going to rile up Arkansas fan base again for the second straight season. I know Note came out saying that he needs to be better and smarter and not get into foul trouble, but I just think that's the kind of player he is. I don't think it's something he can just switch on or off. And with how efficient Vermont is offensively, I kind of see him getting into foul trouble again. That offense for Vermont is just strong. Arkansas is not the greatest 3-point shooting team, and Vermont's 2-point defense is pretty strong as well. So that's just one of those upsets that I think ends up happening. Aside from that, I don't have any extreme things. I have 3 of the 4 10 seeds winning round 1. I don't really know that you can call them strong upsets. I like the way Miami's playing offensively. The 5-out offense against USC and Mobley and Goodwin. I think they can cause some problems. So that's why I have them going. And Loyola Chicago is tough to bet against, and I just Foster Lawyer revenge game against Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That one just stands out to me. One of the big upsets that I mentioned today on Sirius XM is I have Villanova getting knocked off in the second round by Loyola Chicago.
I like it.
It's just – I heard a stat the other day. It's 13 out of the last 14 years or something along the lines where a 2 seed hasn't made it out of opening weekend. And I guess to me, Villanova, appears to be the weakest. It seems weird saying that, right? It's Colin Gillespie and Justin Moore, really strong players, but they didn't finish the season out super strong overall. As far as playing, they had Jermaine Samuels finally stepped up a little bit towards the end of the season, but Gillespie and Moore struggled for the last few weeks of the season. Prior to Gillespie finishing out the year with the last game really strong, but I just think they're vulnerable because of their lack of depth, and obviously dealing with some injuries. Samuels came off the bench one game dealing with, I think it was a back issue or what it was exactly, but all it takes is just one thing for them, and they're in trouble. Especially if Gillespie or Moore turns an ankle again. I think each of them have missed multiple games the last 2 years with ankle injuries, so. As basketball players, your ankle doesn't get stronger after you've had one ankle injury. So, it tends to happen over and over again. So, what kind of upsets do you got for us? Because I feel like mine are just the chalky ones, maybe aside from Nova losing in the second round. But
yeah, no, I love that Nova call because I've been, saying that about them. I didn't say they would lose in the second round, but this season I've just thought that might catch up to them not having any depth, or a true replacement for Jeremiah Robinson Earl. They never really had that guy who could go, work down low and rebound for them. I know Dixon's kind of been doing it lately, but I thought that lack of depth plus the lack of a true big man might hurt them. So yeah, I like that call. The Vermont one is actually my favorite. I hope that the public isn't going to be doing that, because I thought that might be one that was a little sneaky. So I love to hear you call that one out too, because that's actually my favorite upset. Same thing. I think, Shungu and Davis and even Powell to a degree, they're just way too disciplined. They're well coached. They're not going to get rattled. They're a very veteran group, and they're going to force Arkansas to make mistakes. I don't think Vermont will be the one making mistakes, and I think that what we'll see happen is Arkansas will come out playing their game, but Vermont will hit some shots. Then we might see, an early foul trouble for one of the key players, and then all of a sudden Vermont gets out by 7 or 8 points, and I think we see them panic. I think we'll see Arkansas just they'll try to do too much. They'll start shooting threes when they don't need to rely on them, and all of a sudden that lead balloons beyond that. I don't necessarily think that Vermont's going to blow them out or anything, but I do see that happening where Arkansas is going to panic when the deficit is beyond 5 points. And if they do that, I think Vermont just grabs them, by the balls and takes it. So I love hearing that you called that, because that's my favorite one. I'm really confident that Vermont wins it. And I have a few Arkansas fans that have followed me from site to site. So they're not very happy with me after saying that last night, but yeah, I'm all about that one. I do really like the 11s. That's something that we seem to see a lot lately. I think 2 of the last 3 years we've seen an 11 in the Final Four, and it seems like I have to dig in a little more. I have an article I'm writing about bracket picks, but the 11 seeds we typically see 1 or 2 of them come out of their first round game, with the win. So I really like the assuming Rutgers wins against Notre Dame, I think that they have the tools to beat Bama. I may be getting a little too excited there, but I think that they could definitely, the way they match up against Bama's front court, they could win that game. I also am really high on Virginia Tech. I feel like, and it's not just, the fact they're playing really well and they won the conference tournament. That's great. Hot teams in March, we've seen it time and time again. They can do damage and they ride that momentum throughout. So Texas to me is not gelled still, and it's surprising because respect Chris Beard as a recruiter, a coach, and a motivator, but this team just has not gelled the way I thought it would. The defense hasn't been as elite as we're used to seeing for Chris Beard. It's still good and solid, but it just hasn't been that elite, amount. Shots aren't there. Marcus Carr is completely, just 180'd from being a guy you can rely on for damn near 30 points a game, real points, to being nearly a liability at times, to the point where, they're relying on, secondary guys to score points for them. And that's just, it has to be Carr at this time. Timmy Allen's played really well, but yeah, I think that, Virginia Tech has all these ingredients to go far. Guard play, they make threes, and they have depth. And I mean, those 3 things just to me scream that they're going to beat Texas. And I also think that they have a really solid opportunity beyond that to beat a team like Purdue. Virginia Tech doesn't rely on pick and roll necessarily that much, and that's what really beats Purdue. But the lack of 3-point defense and overall defense of Purdue, if Virginia Tech continues to be hot, will be a problem. So I think that they're going, a couple of games and beyond. I'm really excited about them. So I think that they win. Miami, I personally like Miami over USC. I know that, it's just an upset and I guess a name only. I do feel like, man, when you mentioned that South Dakota State Iowa game, that's just going to be like what, over 180 or something. There's going to be no defense played, so that'll be a fun one. I do think the 1 seeds, Baylor has the toughest route, so I could see them dropping, a game to like a St. Mary's or maybe they get a little bit further. But I think Gonzaga and Kansas, to me, have the toughest on paper potential second round matchup. So Gonzaga versus, like, say Boise State wins. I feel very nervous for the Zags against Boise State. So I'm not calling that an upset, but I think if they get past that, they kind of waltz. And then the same thing for Kansas, like Creighton or San Diego State. Those are tough spots for Kansas. And if they get San Diego State, who is so focused on defense, and if Agbaji isn't stepping up, and he's kind of playing this really laid back style he's done lately, I could see San Diego State possibly beating them if Matt Bradley has a monster game. Of course, they don't really have the offense to keep up if Kansas is there, but those are 2 second round matchups that are they're nerve wracking for me. But I think the 1 seeds will ultimately get past. I do have the Vols coming out of the South as the Final Four, so I'm relying on Rick Barnes. So I think eventually they beat Arizona. I am really upset because I 3 teams I really wanted to see make some noise: Longwood, Chattanooga, and UAB, all got pretty horrific matchups. They're all in the same region. Like, they just, mid-major and low-major lovers like myself got really hosed. So I think UAB ultimately, I'd love to pick my man Jelly Walker, but I don't think they beat Houston. The only one out of those 3 that I think could pull the upset is Chattanooga. The main argument, and I've had this discussion with a few people over the last few days, is that they don't have the size to deal with Kofi, right? But, Silvio D'Souza, he can play big. He has the pedigree. He has, the high major experience. And if he can stay on the floor and not foul out early or get 2 early fouls, I think that they could do some serious damage. Or if they're a situation where Illinois is just trading, they're getting 2-point buckets for Kofi, but they're coming back on the other side, and Baptiste and Malachi are knocking down threes or really hot, I could definitely see the Mocs knocking off Illinois. And that might be more wishful thinking than actually my brain, saying, yes, that's going to happen. But I think it's going to be close. I definitely think the Mocs have an opportunity there. And then the only other one that I was looking at, let me see, where is it now? It's not, I don't think it's a first round, and I'll have the Foster Lawyer Bowl for sure. I debated New Mexico State over UConn, but I ultimately I don't think this year's iteration of New Mexico State is going to be able to handle them. What I do think happens is Houston, once we get past the first round, like a Houston-Arizona matchup, I think Houston has a really solid chance to knock them off, especially if Kriisa doesn't play. There's a lot of, I think, overhype about Kriisa not playing. I think Arizona will be fine without him for the most part, but I don't know. I'm pretty high on this Houston team, and I did have to draft 2 of them today, so I have to be. But yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at with upsets. I think that I'm seeing a lot of predictions on Final Fours that are super chalky, and we just know that that's not going to happen. So another thing, and not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure you've had time to think about it. What's a team that you don't necessarily think is going to go to the Final Four, but like a team that's going to surprise? Like, people are going to be like, wow, this team made an Elite 8 run or a Sweet 16 run. Like, just your most surprising team, I guess.
Let's see. I mean, yeah,
like, even if they won one game and just be like,
tough.
Yeah, won, yeah, for sure.
Like, I mean, there's some brackets that I'm doing where I actually have North Carolina beating Baylor.
I like that.
So then, they do that, then they got a chance to face either St. Mary's or UCLA. Like, there's potential for North Carolina to surprise. If it's the North Carolina that showed up at Camden for that Cameron Indoor for that last game, like, they can obviously make a run, but I don't really feel great about some of the random teams. Like, I do like Rutgers, right? Like,
yeah,
they're the ones that I hope win tomorrow night, because I do think they have the best chance against Bama, and then the best chance against Texas Tech to pull an upset too.
Yeah.
Because we know that Texas Tech can struggle to score as well. So, like, I feel like that's be a closer game. I'm not going to do it at all, but, like, I could find a way to get UConn past Gonzaga. Like, that's going to take Sonogo like a Herculean effort to stay out of foul trouble in that game, because that's all he wants to do is pick up stupid fouls. But like, I can see routes like that happen. Like, I guess I could see Colorado State making a little run, like, because we've seen, like, Tennessee's hot, right? Like, if Colorado State gets past Michigan and Dickinson, Tennessee's hot right now, but we've also seen them completely crap the bed this year in spots. So, like, all of a sudden, next thing you know, Colorado State's in the Sweet 16, right? And then if the bottom part of that holds true and, like, Loyola upsets Nova, like I am picking, all of a sudden now you have a Sweet 16 matchup between Colorado State and Loyola Chicago. One of those two are in the Elite Eight then. So I don't like it's weird because like it's a lot more wide open, where last year I mentioned it on Sirius XM today, like last year it was Gonzaga and Baylor at tier 1 and then almost no teams in tier 2 and then a bunch in tier 3. Like there's that big separation.
Yeah.
This year we don't really have that, Gonzaga and Arizona probably are sitting 1 and 2 with and then Kansas, the way that they've been playing. Like I actually have Kansas versus Gonzaga in the national championship game of my my main bracket so far, but like as wide open as it is, like I struggle to see some of these teams making a run, and maybe that's just because it is so wide open. Like I can't trust much for from many of these schools. Bama is a team most of the time I think could make a run, but like they struggled so much that they rely so much on 3-point shooting, and they obviously can't play defense in the lane. Like they just get tore up by bigs, and it's a tough route. Running into potentially Duke, right? If they do win a couple games, to where Mark Williams and Ben Harrow are just going to absolutely destroy them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess the more I talk about it, the more I think that like Alabama could be a team that surprises, just because they can get scorching hot from 3, right? And we've seen teams just make serious runs in the NCAA tournament because they just knock down every 3 that they're taking. But I think at the end we're going to see some pretty chalky Final Fours for the most part. We'll probably see one region end up not chalky, and then the other 3 are 1 and 2 seeds probably. Obviously Purdue or Kentucky coming out of the East. I actually, I like them more than Baylor. Obviously, if I said I had Baylor losing to North Carolina, but I don't. It's one of those weird things.
You're right, because it's like there's so much. Like I see a lot of the predictions. I'm watching the media stuff, and they are picking pretty chalky 1s and 2s, maybe a 3 in their Final Four. But at the end of the day, I think we could see some really shocking results. And I think that the parity is great. I mean, great for the product, but it's going to make it even more difficult to pick a winning bracket. And I was on the show earlier today where I was talking about, it made sense to really be more of a contrarian leverage type of player in your bracket contest this year. Like, instead of picking those chalky, 4-1 seeds or whatever, 2-2s or whatever. Cause I just don't think that's going to happen. Like, I think there'll be a 7 or 7 through 10 that maybe potentially gets into the Elite Eight Final Four. Where am I confident it'll happen? I'm not so sure. I do think if it happens, like it's a double digit that comes out, I think it'll be the East, which you referenced, maybe North Carolina beating. I think Virginia Tech, if they do go on a run, they have a really solid shot. I see potentially that second round matchup between Kentucky and Murray State. I could see a scenario where Murray just, is red hot, and then they pull away and Oscar gets into foul trouble and they move on. And then that's a path for Virginia Tech. So that's where I think it will be the most shocking. I think somebody that comes out of the East is going to be like, a head scratcher for a lot. So that does segue me into the last question I was going to ask you. And you did say you had Gonzaga and Kansas in the championship. So those 2 of your Final Four, but I was going to ask you what your Final Four picks were as of this moment.
As of now, obviously those 2. I do have Kentucky right now. Like that quadrant is one I'm just going back and forth on. Purdue for stretches just looks like a national championship contender, but their defense worries me. But Kentucky just has the matchups that where Sheboy gets into foul trouble, against KJ Williams or against the bigs from Purdue, like Kentucky could be in trouble. But right now it's Kentucky in that region, and then I do have Arizona. But I'm still, I don't know, still thinking that one through. Obviously a lot has to do with Crease's ankle. Just because, like if Tennessee stays hot, like I can be with you, you mentioned I thought you said you had them in the Final Four.
Yeah.
And I can certainly see that happening, especially because I have Nova, getting bounced early. Those are the toughest ones, so for the most part, I'm pretty chalky right now. I'm just still kind of play them out through my head because I don't want to be that chalky. But it's tough to force something that I don't necessarily think, because I try to take each matchup, on its own rather than just slide a team through. But a lot of the tougher matchups are, kind of in the middle of each bracket, right? Like for the most part, the ones seem pretty steady, outside of maybe a tough 8 spot. Because, a lot of people have talked about how, like, traditionally the 5-12 matchup, we get a lot of the 12 upsets, but, this year it's more of the 4-13 that sticks out. Because where I think that they misseeded both lines, right? Like, the 5 seeds probably could have easily been 4s, and a lot of the 4s probably could have easily been 5s or even 6s, with the way that they kind of finished the season outside of UCLA. But, UCLA is a strong 4 seed, obviously, but I don't know. I think we end up seeing some strange happenings in the middle, the 4 through 13 seed games, all those. But then I think ultimately at the end, we kind of see more of a chalkier Final Four. But, I wouldn't be surprised if, Murray State goes on a run, and makes the Elite Eight. And then, they're facing North Carolina or UCLA in the Elite Eight. So that's something I can definitely see coming from the East. But what about you for your Final Four?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Interesting. You said there'll be some upsets in those middle points, and that might make it a little easier for some of these ones. But I have a rather off the wall Final Four, and it's fairly chalky at some points. But yeah, I have Gonzaga, and I have Kansas, but I do have the Vols coming out of the South, which makes me, a little leery. I've been, hosed by Rick Barnes in March more times than I count. Usually it's on the DFS side, but, he makes erroneous calls, plays, questionable decisions that cost his team all the time in March. So it does make me nervous to pick them, but I feel really good about, they've got Mr. Swiss Army knife, Josiah Jordan James. They've got 2 really high quality, point guards. Granted, they're youngsters. Zeigler he doesn't get enough credit, but he's really good. I think he'd start on a lot of teams. And despite not having like a true big man, their defense is so stout that they're able to stunt opposing teams. Fives, we saw Oscar, he still got off semi got off against them, but he's putting up 50s and 60s against people, and talking about fantasy points, and he puts up 35 to 38 against Tennessee, and for the most part he was a non-factor. And even in the game that they just destroyed Tennessee when Ty was shooting like a god, it wasn't like Oscar did anything. So they're able to go head to head with the top big men and kind of contain them, and they have the point guard play, and like you said, they're hot. So their team-wise in their roster, it just seems too strong to me not to come out of the South. But then I look at who their coach is, and he just kind of holds them back a little bit. If he can refrain from doing that, then I think the Vols do come out. And then in the East, I really do feel this way. Sometimes I feel embarrassed to say it though, but I do think Virginia Tech's going to have a really solid chance. As of right now, I'm sitting on Virginia Tech as a Final Four team. I will probably change. I'm still kind of messing around with that part. I do think they're going to win 2 to 3 games. I haven't quite decided what I want to do with the Murray State, because I do think they'll ultimately beat the Dons. I hate that they're facing our Dons, but I think they do have a second round matchup with Kentucky, and I think that the winner of that game has a really solid chance to make a deep run. But at the same time, I think Virginia Tech is going to keep shooting hot. So, and to me, that Baylor side of the region is outside of, like you said, maybe the Bruins or St. Mary's, who I think is very good. I think it's kind of soft. So I think whoever comes out of that bottom half of the region of the East is going to take the Final Four bid and win it. So right now I have Virginia Tech, but I could easily change that to a Kentucky Murray State. Kentucky, I don't feel as confident about them as most people do, because if Oscar gets into foul trouble, I don't think there's enough other pieces to get it done. A hell of a lot of talent, but I just I have some concerns about them being able to make it. They have the depth, but I just I worry about them kind of wilting in the moment. So that's where I'm at. I have a very wacky Final Four. I'm very contrarian. I'm even considering picking Providence just because, I taught, looking at how bad the defense for South Dakota State is, you know what I mean? Like we could see Nate Watson really have a big game. But again, I mentioned trading threes for two. We could see, Nate Watson have, 35 points, but South Dakota State's hit, 8 triples in the first half, and suddenly they're up 12, and it doesn't matter. So I'll probably ultimately play the Jackrabbits, but I do think there's a path for Providence to win. But yeah, a crazy bracket, a lot of wide open stuff to go through here, and lots more work to be done. So I appreciate you coming on, Eric. It's been a pleasure. We'll definitely have to have you on, and Mike at the same time. We'll have to do a kind of a group effort here as we work our way through the tournament with these big slates. For those that don't know, why don't you tell people, where they can find you on Twitter and what site you're at?
Twitter's Razzle11Grinds. Over at DFS Army, just covering baseball and basketball year round, basically. But yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a while. It's a little later than I remember, but I guess most of the time we were always up this late anyways.
It was.
It's just now that I'm back in an office job, like I have to get up a little earlier than before. But no, it's good to sit down and break down a slate or some games going forward. So look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, man. And I've started to do some pre-lock stuff and on weekends earlier. So I'll definitely reach out to you again and try to get you on for some earlier stuff. I could sit here and talk all night about this stuff, but I don't want to keep you too long. So I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody who tuned in live, continues to support the show. Make sure you smash that like button. We are running that 20% off promotion at FTN Daily right now. We're also on FTNBets.com. We have the free bracket challenge. If you fill out a bracket there and you finish the top 3, you get money. You only need to have a free account signed up at FTNBets.com. So free money. I mean, why not? I will be back tomorrow night, right around the same time, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. Mike Kutry will be back on with me, and we'll be covering the entire Thursday first round slate from beginning to end, talking in depth. Make sure you have your coffee and you put your kids to bed early because it's going to be a long one. So thanks again to Razzle. Thanks to everyone who supports the show. Take care, guys. Best of luck tomorrow. See you.